email will compile and start. So as you can see, the meeting we've started recording it. The other thing is I will invite the communications and engagement team to, oh, there is Isabel. Isabel is happy to see you. Hi. We can hear you. We're just about to do a round of introduction to the communications and engagement team for AgriFoSe, and then we can kick off the meeting. So I'll begin. My name is Nyendo Mashua. I work at the Stockholm Environment Institute. We're part of the AgriFoSe consortia. We support with communications and engagement, and I'm happy to be here. I'll pass it over to Salom.
Hi, my name is Salom Kubega. I also work with the Stockholm Environmental Institute, and I support the communications and engagement. And it's nice to see you all.
Hi, everyone. My name is Agnes Bondesson. I work as a communication officer at SLU Global. It's the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences in Sweden.
And finally, we have Isabel, who's also part of the team.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, my name is Isabel Vogel, and I'm the Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning Consultant working with the Communications and Engagement team. Lovely to see you.
I also see we have Sophia, the Program Director, and a few challenge leaders who've joined. I'm sure you know them in your own capacities. There she is waving. So we'll begin the webinar now, which is documenting change stories. And it's not that you don't know how to write change stories. You've been writing and submitting magnificent change stories. But the reason for this webinar really is just to go through the guidelines that we shared with you. And Isabel will be talking more about the what we call outcome harvesting, which we will be doing at the end of this year. But for now, you have started submitting some change stories for the annual report that is coming up this quarter of the year. So we will go through this webinar, and then at the end, we'll have a 20-minute or 20 to 25-minute session with Q&A. But as I said, feel free to post your question on the chat, and if you can keep your mics muted. Thank you. Isabel, I think we can begin with the next slide. So documenting change stories should be as intentional as collecting research data. I think sometimes maybe researchers, we get so busy with collecting data for the project that we sometimes forget the real essence of the project, which is tracking changes that you're bringing to the community that you work in the context that you work in. So as you collect your research data, with the same intention, you should collect and document your change stories just to map out the impact that you're making and how this data can help you with the progress that you're making in the different activities that you have in your project. The next slide. So there's two reasons why. Sorry. Agnes, I think I can mute. Yes. So the reasons why we collect change stories, especially in AgriFoSe, is for two reasons. One is for communications, and one is for monitoring and evaluation and learning. And change stories are important because they effectively communicate the context of the project. You give the political setting, the social setting, the economic setting of the region and the people that you're working with, the progress of the project that you're working with, and the impact that you want to achieve. So it's mostly communicating what you're doing and the project activities and the outcomes that you want to see. So for communication specifically, we encourage you to write change stories to communicate information about your project and its impact. Number two is to keep stakeholders such as the community that you work with, the different stakeholders, and even the funders up to date with the project activities. People need to know what you're doing and how this change is coming about. How can they support? How are you tracking your change, either big or small? And for monitoring, evaluation, and learning is to track and document how change is unfolding in your project or program. You've mapped out this change that you have in your long-term change statement, but there are small little changes or big changes are then are the ones that will unveil at the end into this one big change. So it helps you track and document. The other reason for monitoring and evaluation learning for the change stories is to make decisions about your project on how to adopt your project and improve and sustain impact over time. So just like any research, you have to go back, keep going back and optimizing what you're doing in the project. Is it somewhere you went wrong? Are there some stakeholders you didn't involve? How can you better communicate with these people? So you keep optimizing your outcomes and how you're doing things, your process, your procedures, so that the change can be, can be good and solid. And the third reason for this is to, give you an opportunity to step back, reflect, and celebrate your achievements. Most times you don't see the change that's happening, but people are seeing it. So the more you track your change that's happening, the outcomes, then you keep reflecting and celebrating your achievements. So those are two reasons why we write and document communications, change stories for communications and for monitoring, evaluation, and learning. At this point, I'll hand over to Isabel, who'll take us through the next part.
Great, thanks very much, Ngendo. I just wanted to check that you're seeing the audience view and not the presenter view. Is it the right one? Yeah, the big slide, brilliant. So yeah, exactly as Ngendo was saying, that the change stories are part of the AgriFoSe monitoring, evaluation and learning system, which all of you will now have, or most of you, unless your project's very new, will have actually developed the project theory of change. And then we have some simple monitoring tools that track the theory of change as you're going along. So key meetings trackers, after action reviews that some of you have been using. And then capturing the change stories from the project is this key piece that we're talking about today. And we also have kind of project reporting. And this, I guess, is a qualitative approach and a reflexive approach that we've opted for in AgriFoSe, because we know the change is very complex that you're trying to promote with translating science into policy and practice. So having these kind of tools that help us to stop and reflect and think about the change and how significant it is and what it means for our project is a key part of it. I know some projects are also doing additional things like surveys and those kinds of tools that are more quantitative, and the whole thing is intended to be complementary. So today we're talking about change stories, as Ngendo has talked to us, and I just wanted to say a little bit more about exactly what Ngendo was saying about, change is happening as you're going through, and we don't know today what changes might grow and become significant tomorrow, and it's often the way that we're rushing to implement and not perhaps stopping and seeing, oh, actually, this group within the community that we're working with is actually starting to change their mindset, or they're starting to change their behavior, or actually adopting some of the practices that we're talking about. And actually, it's a good point to stop and try and capture that. So we've talked about this before, but it's about tracking small changes, but that might become mighty over time. And your theory of change helps you think about the pathway, and the change story helps you to capture some of these small but potentially mighty changes as they happen. So just to recap, what's a change story? And sorry, this is very text heavy, these slides, but I think we're hoping we can share them as well afterwards, just to jog everybody's memory. So I think we've had some conversations in previous webinars about what's the kind of scale of change that's sufficient to merit kind of capturing a change story. And we've been discussing in the team, and I think from our perspective, it's about a collective level of change, that it's about perhaps a farmers group or several farmers groups adopting a practice, or perhaps there's a community level change. So some examples might be that you're observing some shifts in social norms in the community, perhaps around women's economic participation or participation in an economic activity. And we're seeing that in some of the projects that you're doing. It might be that there's a farmers group or several that you're working with, decide to pool resources to buy kind of new equipment or new implement a practice that you've been promoting and working with them. Or it might be that you've been in lots of dialogue with a local government or national government, and they're actually putting some work in, or a budget in, to start to develop a regulation. So these are kind of early changes, but they're at a sort of collective level, and that I think is is kind of a good point to stop and capture a change story. It doesn't mean that we're not interested in individual people changing. I think we want to use kind of individual stories to illustrate this perhaps broader collective change. So I think there's a place for both. But I think focusing on like one farmer and writing a whole change story about one farmer, that might be kind of almost like too much effort. I think we want to wait until perhaps there might be several farmers, or that farmer's shared with other farmers in the group, and you're seeing something a bit more collective. So the level of detail is also important to think about, and what we're looking for is not something that's a huge report, but it's actually just sufficient description in the change story to understand the context, what the nature of the change is, the kind of scale of the change that I've just been talking about, and what the significance of it is, and a reflection on the project's contribution to that change. So we want a rich story, but kind of quite focused. And then obviously a change story is not just about the document, but it's about the process. And really, I think this is the heart of the tool, that it's about learning, and it's about having a process of team reflection. It really shouldn't be just about bureaucracy. It should be something that's kind of useful for the team to reflect on. So the change story development should involve you as a team getting together, taking a bit of time to discuss what changes you've observed, where, who's involved, reflecting together on what's important about the change and who is it important to, because we have to remember that there are different perspectives on a change, and it may be important to us as a project, but there may be other aspects to it. And then having an open, I think there's some background noise coming through. Could somebody mute? Yeah, brilliant, thank you. And then we want an open reflection on, in the team, on how the project has contributed. Maybe there's been a small contribution, but actually there's been a lot of momentum in the context, or maybe there's a larger project that's been helping to push things along, but that your project actually contributed something unique there. Or it may be that your project has actually been the major contributor to this change, and that's something that we really want to bring out. And then finally, it's about kind of agreeing as a team how you're going to tell the story, from whose perspective, and what's the narrative. So we know stories have many chapters, and the change story is really trying to capture, one of those chapters, or perhaps a couple of those chapters. So, how do we kind of just focus the story? And I'm sure, we'll have lots of questions about that in the when we get to the discussion. So this is an example of a change story that I've adapted from, actually I meant to put the attribution in, it's from an IFAD project that I was looking online. So there's a lot of text here. I think I won't try and read it all, but it's really about kind of solar powered irrigation systems being adopted by women farmers in 3 Rwandan cooperatives. So we're giving a bit of context for that change, that in Rwanda there's erratic rainfall. They've been using a lot of fuel powered irrigation systems that have cost a lot, and there's a lot of the sale of the produce, it just isn't covering the cost. So the project team has shared technical knowledge, and actually supported the piloting of the solar powered irrigation systems, and actually several cooperatives have adopted this and seen actually increase in yields. So then we want to move on and reflect on the significance. So it's actually the demonstration that these are low cost and easy for people to install with just a little bit of training, has actually made a huge difference in that for those cooperatives and their production. And then there's a reflection on the contribution of the project. That the project worked in collaboration with local community leaders and the leaders of the cooperatives to ensure that the technology was really tailored to the local conditions. There was also training. But then in that final paragraph, we can see that, in this story, we want to document that there were other factors that helped. And it was really the engagement of the local leaders that created the acceptance of the new approach and paved the way for the project to really proceed with the demonstration. So that is an example of a change story, which I think, the kind of level of detail and the type of narrative that we're aiming for. So we thought it would be useful to share an example. And then just thinking ahead to where we want to get to later this year in AgriFoSe is kind of how can we use change stories to actually build up a qualitative evidence base across the project or even for the whole program. So, perhaps one change story by itself, we might not think about as evidence. It's kind of a good thing and a good reflection. But if we kind of collect them across the project and we can have some change stories that are about, early changes and early outcomes, we've got more change stories that are telling us about kind of more longer term adoption and some changes that are really becoming kind of rooted as new practices. Maybe we have some more around there. Then we're actually starting to build up good learning and a good kind of qualitative evidence base, and we can do this through a process which we call outcome harvesting, where we can get all of the projects to contribute, and together we kind of map them to the program theory of change, and we think about the significance and what does it mean and what are we learning. Sorry, a few more change stories. And this is an established approach in the evaluation community. We call it kind of theory-based evaluation. So even though it's kind of more qualitative, and there may be other kinds of evidence as well, but it actually helps us to actually document and build up a good picture along the theory of change. More change stories appearing. I was obviously feeling enthusiastic there. So I think we can go through the template now, Ngendo. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think
how we're doing for time. Yeah.
You're good on time. You can proceed.
Great. Okay. So most of you hopefully will have seen the template that we've shared. I think Ngendo shared it with the agenda for this meeting. So it's just really got the headings that I've already talked about, but with a few prompts, to help you to develop the change story. So first of all, I think it's really important to remember the date of the documentation. I think it's, when you're in the project, you're thinking about it, you're thinking of all the important stuff, but but the date is quite important when we want to look back. So I think that's the first thing, is to say, what's the date of this change story, the date of the discussion. It may be that you want to put in more dates about when you've been seeing the change developing. So first of all, we want to start with, what actually happened. So brief description of the change, including what changed, who was involved, where and when it happened, and aiming to give that kind of rich description that I gave an example of, with the context and places, but keeping in mind, obviously, confidentiality always. It would be, I think it's really nice if you can include a sort of individual perspective or a quote that helps to illustrate, but just remembering that we're wanting to talk about a more collective scale of change. But you may have quotes from different stakeholders that you've been engaging with that really illustrate and bring to life that change. The next stage is the significance of the change. So, why is this change relevant or important to your goals in your theory of change, which could be practice related or policy related? And what kind of issue or challenge does the change help to address or move forward on? So there may have been some barriers around gender norms, for example, or there may have been some challenges around access to market. And this change story is really illustrating how that change helps to address those challenges and move things forward. Something we've noted in the template is it's interesting to reflect on whether the change is planned or actually it's something that's unplanned, but that has come about, even though you weren't expecting it. And that they're also important to capture those kinds of changes, because it could be something that's really important for the project, even though you're focusing on something else. Change stories can be negative. I think in AgriFoSe we're focusing on positive ones, but but sometimes there are setbacks, and actually how you responded, how the stakeholders you're working with responded to create, deal with that challenge or setback can also be a really important change story. The next element of the story is to reflect on the project's role and contribution. Maybe the project was convening, maybe it was coordinating. Did you actually bring a lot of knowledge or training? And then it's important it's good practice from a MEL point of view to reflect also on, were there other actors or factors or influences that could have played a role and, perhaps created more momentum. And then I think that's it in terms of the actual content. Then I think it would be really helpful if you can kind of note whether there is any documentation or data or anything that could support the analysis, or whether there's something that could help corroborate the story. Just looking ahead at where there may be an external evaluation, and external evaluators can come in and actually say, okay, we've got this great qualitative evidence base. We're going to actually go and see if we can find more evidence or corroborate this change. And so it's just helpful to document where you feel that might be possible. So that's the template really, and it's just a few bullet points at the side there that, just as a reminder that it captures the important signs of progress towards the theory of change goal in a systematic and reflective and analytical way. It captures those incremental changes, as Ngendo said at the beginning, it's small but mighty steps along your pathway. And the change story encourages us to kind of critically reflect on the role we've played alongside other factors and what was really the nature of our contribution. And I think the change story is probably the most kind of analytical, reflective one out of all of our tools. And so you can use kind of key meetings, your after action reviews as inputs, and perhaps consult with others as well. So I think that's it from the kind of presentation side. So I'll stop there. Shall I put up the slide with the discussion questions now and hand over to Salom? Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
It's now time for us to have a general discussion, and thank you so much for your presentations, Isabella and Ngendo. We have prepared a couple of questions for you to reflect on, and then after that, we'll have a general sort of discussion that do not perhaps relate to these questions. So the first one would be, what has been your general experience with documenting change stories? Are there any experiences that you would like to share with us regarding documenting change stories? Kindly raise your hand if you have a comment, and then I can give you the floor to speak. Any hands? Many of you have been writing change stories already. Hi, Frank, go ahead.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Just to thank you for organizing this, I'll just share an experience with the RAFS project in Uganda, where we've drafted a couple of change stories so far. One critical thing to put in mind as you think through the change story is to keep track. So these tools like the after action, the before action reports are very, very critical because they help you to situate your story. But also the interactions with the different stakeholder groups is very, very critical because each of these groups will have their own perspective of what they perceive as a change to them. So having feedback sessions with them as well as within the team is very, very critical. And that in one way has helped us to do whatever we've come so far in terms of the change stories. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Frank. Very interesting experience with having feedback sessions with the group and the people you're sending your intervention to. Any other comments? How's your experience been? Has it been good? Has it been bad? Has it been easy? Has it been difficult? Hi, Robert.
Thank you, Salom, yeah, I'm speaking from Zimbabwe, and we've been working on edible insects here in Zimbabwe. I must say, coming up with a change story, it was quite an exciting moment for the group. What we realized of most important is we need to gather evidence. I think the evidence part is the one that we really took note of. When we started the project, we kind of were doing so many things, and some of the things were escaping us. We thought they were too small changes to note. But after this training and interactions with the AgriFoSe team, we realized that during the process, we need to gather as much of the evidence as possible so that we build to the bigger story. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. Hi, Judith. Go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, thank you very much. And I also want to thank the people for organizing this, especially documenting the change project. Personally, the experience I had some kind of fear. You know, I'm dealing with a highly patriarchal society, and I had to involve the male counterparts because it's a gender biased project, male counterparts in the district I'm working with. And one of them was to move, one of the key issues was to move women from where they are in the community and bring them to the city, Kampala, for a training with the Uganda Research Industry Institute. And I was not very sure whether I'll be able to pull it off, but with the stakeholders interaction and also going back and forth to the field and interaction with the stakeholders, I had to go an experience which I also enjoyed, asking consent from the male counterparts for their wives to come over for the training. I think to me that one was one of those experiences that I kind of had feared, but somehow they accepted under consent and handed over their women. Yeah, that's the experience I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. I thank you that it's also a learning opportunity for all of us, I guess. But also we want to find out whether you've struggled with considering something as a change or not, as a significant change or not. What has been your experiences with that? Have you sometimes thought, is this change enough? Is this not change enough? What has been your experience?
Yeah, sometimes you would think, because you'd think that maybe this is not change enough, but from the experience from the stakeholders or the communities you're dealing with, you will hear some comments and say, by the way, this has been nice for us, and you think maybe it was obvious, and then you that's when you notice that, yeah, through these interactions, I think it has been changed on my side. Yeah, that's the comment I can give.
Perfect. Any other comments on finding out something is significant change or not? Hi, Mayo, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm Messia, and I'm working in the project on biologicals in Sub-Saharan Africa. Yeah, thanks for the discussion presentation. Yeah, I can also reflect one of the things that maybe initially we had difficulties to like consider if it's a change or not, because for example, is in respect to awareness on biologicals. So we had some interviews with the farmers, and then let's say in the course of ending, let's say the survey, then you hear farmers saying, we didn't know anything about the biologicals, but at least now we know that there are biologicals, and maybe we need more understanding, but at least we know there are biologicals, and maybe this kind they do, let's say, some things vis-a-vis these synthetic inputs. So initially we didn't think of this as a change, but I think it is. In other words, because of the project, I think we have at least made a change. And then the other issue is, especially in terms of the a bit of a general experience, is like sometimes we feel like a bit uncomfortable saying this is directly linked to the project, because there might be some other factors that have caused the change. So it's sometimes there's a bit of a dilemma. I don't know if we can also hear from other at least members on their thing, that because it's not like an experiment. I mean that you can clearly think out that this is caused by maybe our influence. So sometimes we had that feeling. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think
Selom,
Isabel.
I could just come in there, but very briefly, because I know we've got about 5 other people. But I think that's absolutely key thing to think about, because we're not asking for you to say the project was the only factor. We're asking you to reflect on what was the contribution. And this is something that we do in evaluation a lot, is to say, okay, the project made a contribution, but there were other things involved as well. And so it's great if you can actually reflect on that, because it also then helps you to think about, you know, there are maybe other opportunities for you to work on. But I understand it's sometimes uncomfortable to feel you want to claim that the project was the cause, but the change story actually encourages you to reflect on other things that might be also happening. So yeah, I just wanted to come in on that, but really great point. So thank you for making it.
Yeah, thank you very much. And for the hint also, thanks.
Thanks, Isabel. I think as long as you're capturing the fact that there is a change in context and that might also affect the outcomes, then that's good enough. Hi, Marisia.
Hi, Selom. I'm Marisia. I'm part of AgriFoSe extension project. So far, we haven't yet documented, but I have experienced it from another project. I think the challenge of identifying, at first, we struggled on exactly identifying what were the changes. There are those obvious changes you can see, but the learning thing that I took from that project is the importance of documenting the situation. What was the situation before? Clear, like when you start the project, what was the situation? Therefrom, you can easily identify even the smallest changes. But if you just start the project without capturing the context and what was the exactly thing at that moment, then it will be very difficult, especially identifying the point where you started, like where was the change started, and where do you finish the documentation of the change story. I think that is the very thing that I struggled before, like where exactly do I start to narrate, like this is the change, and where do I end, like this is where we are, and where we stopped. I think that is the learning point I took from identifying the changes. If you exactly capture the context, it will be easy to identify the changes that has happened. Thank you.
Thank you, Marisia. And it's very important to always capture the context because it shows how far you have moved also and what change you can claim. Hi, Florides.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Florides from the Philippines, Southeast Asia, digitalization of extension services. One of the struggles that we had in capturing the change story that we attempted to cover was really at what point shall we consider a particular behavior, the change has taken place. So at the start, we were able to identify, now even at the survey level, during the research process, we already identified people whom we have interviewed where we saw possible beautiful change stories that would capture later. And exactly what we did, we went back to them and have a more in-depth interview on what they've learned out of our interaction with them. And so from there, we were able to identify 7 key people whom we have interviewed, but we just shortened or trimmed down to only 3 significant people to capture the change stories. But the issue there in terms of the struggle is really at what particular point should we capture that particular change in behavior, and at what level should be at the individual or community. So at the start, we thought it would be best if we have individual, but later on, we realized that the change in behavior of one particular farmer should read down to a larger context wherein the community should be influenced. And so that's the tweaking part that was quite challenging for us. But along the process, very interesting that we've learned something about it. I mean, the insights that we gained out of that. And so we tried to improve our change story, and hopefully we really captured what we ought to capture out of that story we attempted to come up with. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to make a comment on that, Isabel? No. Okay. Thank you. Hi, Sam.
Yeah, thank you so much. I would want to go on from what the other two speakers have said. There is this problem or challenge between a common change, and the changes which can occur because of the various groups of people or various groups of individuals that you work with. I'm from Kenya, and we are doing something here with farmers, and not all farmers are at the same points or whatever. So how do you deal with with the differences within the same group of people who might be having various changes in their subgroups, rather than a common change in the entire group? Thank you.
Yeah, would you like me to come in on that?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess from what you're describing, I guess the significance aspect is perhaps why some farmer groups might be moving more quickly than others. And so you could frame a change story around that, so that, you know, some of the groups or some of the farmers seem to be moving a little bit faster than another. And then you can reflect on why you think that is. I think that's how I would capture that. So perhaps the change is a partial change that is important, but you're kind of wanting to perhaps dig into the factors that may be, you know, why some are taking their time a bit more to actually yeah, I'm not sure what your project is, but, you know, they're taking a bit longer or a different approach to what the project is offering them. So I think it's possible to think about partial change, and then the story in the significance part, you can actually reflect on what the different factors and elements might be. And then as a process, that could actually help you to perhaps refine your approach, that you may need to tailor your approach to the different groups. Does that help?
And I am talking about, we are doing what? A change rather than changes.
Yeah.
Within the same group, there can be various changes rather than one common change. So how do you deal with that? E.g., a group of farmers have adopted technology A, and a group of other farmers have adopted technology B, according to their capabilities. So how do you capture the changes rather than a common change that we are talking about? Thank you.
I think then I would suggest going back to your impact pathway for the project, your theory of change, and saying what is the broader change that you're looking for? Is it about farmers adopting technologies appropriate to them? And then you can reflect on the different changes, but perhaps the broader change is actually about the tailoring and the appropriateness of the technology that they're adopting. But it sounds like what you're describing, you're still seeing adoption happening, but it's just different for different groups because they're in different places. So the change story can be about the broader change is adoption, but actually we're seeing very different patterns because of different circumstances. And then even within the change story, you can reflect on those differences. Does that feel that would work for your project?
Yeah, that's quite okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, brilliant. Good question, though. I think it's a flexible framework, I think, the change story. But yeah, thank you for raising that.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. And we always have to remind ourselves that change might occur through very different mechanisms. So capturing the mechanisms is fine, but also looking ahead to see what the broader sort of change is. And in this case, generally adoption of different technologies would be the broader change, but the mechanisms may be different, maybe also indicating that these sort of mechanisms are different and the similarities or the differences between them to be shown would be interesting, right? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Now we move on to the third question. What did you find particularly difficult or easy about writing a change story? Did you find anything easy or difficult about it?
Salom, let me take you back. There's some question on the chat from Janina. She says, sometimes mindset changes are very subtle. How does one document such, especially given the short period of 1 year of the project? Janina, do you want to ask the question broader, or this should cover it?
Yeah, so my concern is really with the short period of tenure that we have with the communities, because there is a big chance that we can miss out on getting the change story, because it might happen later on after the end of the project. So what can we document in the time being?
Yeah,
so
I think
we have a chance, we can document the story that time, but in this 1 year, how do we go about that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think that's why we're talking about these kind of small changes that might be kind of early stage, but the project may not be around for perhaps some of the bigger changes. And again, I think going back to the impact pathway and thinking, well, how far is our project has the potential to go in 1 year, and are there kind of some important changes that we hope to see even within 1 year, and then the change story could help kind of document even a very early stage change. So you mentioned about mindset change. So again, if that is as far as the project is able to go in 1 year, that's still kind of really important to try and capture and reflect on. Although I agree that mindset change is very difficult to observe, but you may observe some behaviors or the way people are speaking, or they're coming up to you and saying, I think like the colleague who was talking about the biologicals, that people are saying, okay, we can see that there's something different, and maybe there's a change story you can capture on that may be chapter 1 of the story, and the project may only get to chapter 1 or 2. And this is always a challenge with science and science translation is, we have very long timelines for kind of a big change, which is why we want to try and capture the little steps along the way that at least give us a picture. I don't know if that helps, but this approach is trying to help deal with that challenge. So again, I think there is an art perhaps to kind of be alert to like what might be a small change, and I think another colleague was saying the importance of documenting these, because if you wait to the end, then often you can't remember when was it that people first started to come up to us and say, aha, this is something different that we haven't seen before. Whereas at least if you can try and do it at the in the time, that's captured. Sorry, that was a bit of a long answer, but yeah, it is a real challenge. I hear you.
Thank you, Isabel. Yeah, I guess the point there is that the theory of change gives you the bigger picture, but there are smaller, tiny things that happen that helps you to attain the impact. So we want you to sort of document these tiny impacts along the way, right? David, any comments, David?
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry that I missed the first part of the session because I've been on the road. And I just want to make a, a brief contribution to the discussion that my project is in Kenya, looking at improvement of pastoralist livelihoods through capacity building on matters of food and nutrition. And I was also struggling with what can be considered as a change in the initial stages. And but I realized, because one of the things that we are trying to do was to sort of facilitate an engagement process where the policymakers can listen to the very low level stakeholders, the farmers or pastoralists, on how they define and even prepare food and nutrition policies. But in the initial stages, there was a lot of reluctance because, as you know, many government bureaucrats think they know everything, they have solutions to everything. So when we are thinking about how do we bring the local knowledge and local people, even through simple trainings, they were like, don't waste your time and effort there. We have all the answers and we simply need to call the farmers or person and tell them, do this, do that. So after a lot of that back and forth engagement, we decided, okay, to just facilitate some peer learning or exchange visit the farmers. And we thought it was nice to even involve the officers and other stakeholders. And it took us a lot of time and effort to persuade them to even attend the exchange visit. But we are surprised that after we came back, of course, a few of them joined us, but when we came back, they sort of bought the whole idea or concept because they liked what they saw happening in the other part of the world. The kind of engagement or interaction between farmers and officers in another part of the country. So when they came back, they took it upon themselves to even and create resources to train more other people. So to me, I think that was a very important mindset change. That nobody is rigid. Even the most rigid persons, it just requires some level of persuasion, never give up, and you'll be surprised that their mindset can change, and the things that at the outset, the things that maybe they were putting you off about, you find them embracing them and practicing them. So we just feel like to us that's an important mindset change, but now what we are struggling with is, do we record it as at the individual change? Because there are changes at individual stakeholder level, maybe individual farmers doing this or that, individual officers. But this one, we consider it to be a change at the institutional level. Yeah, it's a mindset change. And because for us, it was very, very interesting that other people are calling us saying, you know, just because of the exchange visit you organized last month, now the whole, the local government office has decided, the officers who attended it came back and they influenced their bosses, saying what we saw there was very important. Why don't we also do something similar? So that's what I wanted to share, that it's never easy. And this is something that even when we are writing our impact pathway or even our concept, we didn't think of it that way. Yeah. But through our initial engagements, we are like, do we give up because the officers are saying they know everything? And we don't have to waste our time training farmers or thinking of exchange. But after coming from it gave us a completely new dimension. That the things that they were telling us, don't waste your time there. We know them. Those farmers, some of them are illiterate. Why are you taking them there? They will not understand. But then and what surprised us is that they recorded it in their performance matrix. The way they recorded it, not like AgriFoSe, they're saying that the county government and the University of Nairobi and their collaborators organized that training, and now things are working. So to us, that's a very important. Otherwise, thank you.
Yeah, David, I think that's a fascinating story, and I think you've actually, narrated a change story there. And I think you not only have a mindset change, I think there's a behavior change there in the officers as well. I think you've probably got two change stories there in what you're describing, and I'll just pick up on some of the comments in the chat about whose perspective we can think about the change from. Because I think, first of all, you describe how the community and the stakeholders themselves felt that this project was different, and actually after your peer learning, they were much more open and receptive to the project. And I think that's kind of, that's one change happening there. And then related to that, there's also this change in the officers. And then they've actually put some resources in, which makes that a much more tangible change as well. But I think, like the other colleague was saying previously, that you can perhaps capture differences in the changes in different individual farmers, but within that kind of broader change of actually being much more accepting of the project and perhaps feeling listened to, and that the project is wanting to actually bring in and build from the local knowledge, which perhaps is different from their previous experience. But those are very rich changes that you're describing there, and I think behind the scenes, I'm sure it was very challenging for the project to move ahead in the context where there was a lot of resistance because of the way previous projects had engaged. So I think in the chat, I think somebody said, do you need a consensus to document a change? I think a consensus might not always be easy, but it might be a great opportunity to have a reflection process with your stakeholders, because just reflecting on change helps people to feel it even more. So, you may want a discussion to say, actually, how are we feeling this change? I think as a rule of thumb, it's always good to think about the change from the perspective of the people you want to help, but also the stakeholders involved. But I think there is a whole dimension in AgriFoSe that is also about yourselves as the project team and yourselves as scientists and practitioners, which I think there's also lots of learning and change happening for yourselves as a team. So I think there are many different kinds of change, looking at it from the perspective of the stakeholders, the community, perhaps, some of the government officials. There may be different groups that you're working with, but there is also an important aspect to AgriFoSe, which is about your own experiences and relationships and networks and skills that you're building through the project as well. So that's picking up on the change that on the comment that colleagues have been putting in the chat. But I think these are great illustrations of the kinds of changes, mindset and early adoption and early behaviors that change stories are designed to capture, and that over time build up into a very rich documentation of what's actually happening in the project. Yeah, so I think that's.
Thank you, Isabel.
Some more questions in the chat. Yeah.
Can we take Dai, and let's be quick because we have very little time left. Dai, maybe 1 minute.
Mm-hmm.
No.
I think the question about unplanned changes that you have there, Salom, is really interesting.
Yeah.
I think perhaps David was hinting at that even though the theory of change set out something, this was actually, what they saw in their project was actually bigger than they had anticipated in the theory of change. So in some respects it was unplanned. But yeah, I think it'd be great to hear some reflections about kind of unplanned changes that people are seeing.
Yeah. Any reflections on unplanned changes? Perhaps something that is not related to the theory of change that you realized. Hi, David, again.
Hi, just an extension of what I was explaining, that finding resources for any activity can be challenging. For example, the county government we are working with, they told us that their resources were fixed because they have 5-year planning and budgeting process. So when we approach them and we are asking them if they are planning any capacity building, they say, no. For the next 5 years, we are not thinking of training anybody. We are not thinking of it because we don't have resources. But we are surprised that 2 weeks later, after our exchange visit, they came back and found resources. So they were able to tinker with their budget. Yeah, just because they liked the exposure. Yeah. So to us, that was something it looks strange that these are the same officers who said their budgets were fixed. So we've been wondering, how possible was it that they were able to change their budget and find resources to train over 50 other people on the same things that we had taken a sample to learn elsewhere. Yeah, so that was very unexpected but positive change. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Great.
Any other comments? Are you still with us, Dai? Okay. Do you want to make a comment? Okay.
Okay, I'm here. I'm from Vietnam. I have one comment.
Yeah.
Unexpected change and also difficulty to record and keeping up the most significant change. You know that with we implementing is not the whole activity of the project. So we may be implemented some activity of the project. That is very difficult to differentiate between the change that is caused or the contributes by the intervention of the project and the change is contributed by the other factor other than its intervention, the project. So how we can record the most significant change as a result of the project intervention? And this also related to because we want our activities to just do a survey to see and how we can be able to support to promote the e-commerce so that the small farmer can benefit from the e-commerce to increase their income. But promoting the e-commerce, so many factors contributing for that. That change may be not actually result from our intervention because we just do the survey or the couple of recently couple of capacity building. So my question is, your experience in the defining the most significant change, and that is as the result from the contribution from our project intervention. Back to you.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and I will say something that's maybe a bit unusual, but I think it's not so much about what the project contributed first. It's first thinking about the change, and it may be in your setting, maybe there have been other initiatives before, and so over time that's kind of building. But maybe your project has brought in just that extra element that has actually, taken the change over the line. So I think in the change story, we're asking you to think about the change first, and that it's important because it's an important step in your impact pathway, and then reflect on what the project has contributed. And it sometimes helps think about the role. I mean, did the what was it that was important about what the project did? Did you maybe bring stakeholders together that had never had an interaction before, even though there may have been many projects in this area? Or is it that you brought a particular user-friendly app, that farmers were able to use? Maybe the other apps were too complicated. Maybe there was something in the training that you provided that just really made the difference for people. So I think we're never expecting change to be only one project, one change. We know there are always many factors. So first of all, think about the change and its significance for your impact pathway and the people you're working with, and then track back and say, what was it, that little extra element of that role or contribution that the project made? And sometimes you have to think, in a very broad way about that. Maybe it was just, listening to people where, like David was saying, and respecting their perspectives, whereas other projects had always come in top down. I think every project brings something, different to the mix, and that's what the change story asks you to reflect on. But I think we're out of time, but I hope that's helped. It's been really fantastic. Thank you for your enthusiastic participation. Yeah, over to you, Salom. Yeah.
Yes, unfortunately, we are out of time, even though it's a very exciting discussion. But thank you so much for today, and we encourage you to sort of take inspiration from the various perspectives that has been shared with each other in documenting the change stories. Thank you, and see you again sometime. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Send us the presentation.
I will share the presentation.
Yes, we will share the
recording.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.